Hello there. My name is maybe not that important at the moment, and I am sure we will have plenty of time for proper introductions. However, I'm here today to talk to you about the box I live in. Before sharing with you the size and colors of the walls of this hideous yet comfortable box I live in, I need to tell you a brief story, and that is the story of the romance between me and writing. Everybody has always told me that I was born with a talent for writing. I would call it an inclination rather than a talent, but the outcome was pretty much the same. Me and my pen have always been inseparable, and since the very first time I learned how to write, I basically never stopped. I started when I was very young by writing poetry, because let's be honest, what kind of dysfunctional adolescent can you aspire to be if you don't write at least one melancholic, gloomy, verbose ode to the moon when you are 14? I wrote plenty of those. Later on, when I thought that my writing skills were mature enough, I decided to fully dedicate myself to storytelling. I have lost count of how many novels I started without ever finishing one. I have a literal drawer full of abandoned characters and very elaborated plots that will never get to see their endings. My latest masterpiece I started a couple months ago, and I am still trying to set a date for me to dump it. All this to say that writing has always had a major role in my existence and in my many ways of dealing with it. Now, while keeping that in mind, let's get back to the tiny box. After what I would call a rather normal childhood, in which maybe I was thought to be a particularly shy kid, and after a textbook adolescence during which I was rewriting the history of literature with my poems and novels, and during which I was obviously drunk with pride and entitlement, when I was 18, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety and a panic disorder. The process that led from my first panic attack to that final diagnosis is pretty long, and maybe we can talk about it in a different occasion. What I want to discuss here is how I struggled to accept my diagnosis. I wasn't happy with it. I was sure that there was something physical, something real that was making me sick. And I just wanted to be referred to a real doctor who would believe me and who would properly check on my symptoms. It took me years to understand that panic disorder is something both real and physical, and that a psychiatrist is actually a better choice than a cardiologist if you don't have any heart condition. Accepting to be a mental patient with a mental disorder, though, was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my entire life. To be completely honest, I was not worried about the stigma that was and is around mental illness. I was a teenager. I couldn't care less about other people's opinions, or so I thought, and I was stupid enough to think that there was even a decadent, a romantic quality to having a mental illness. It was something that could have perfectly fit my poetic persona and fed my artistic inspiration. If only I had known. If only I had known. What I couldn't believe was that all those overwhelming symptoms that I was experiencing and that felt undoubtedly real to me were nothing but a product of my brain. So in my head, the truth was still different. And as long as they would have treated me for my mental illness, they would have inevitably kept ignoring the true physical illness that was actually killing me. But as the months went by, I realized that what was supposed to kill me on the spot wasn't killing me at all. It was just making me miserable. So I started thinking that maybe that diagnosis wasn't completely wrong, and that maybe that psychiatrist knew a thing or two about what he was talking about. After 8 months of never leaving the house, of being scared of eating, sleeping, going upstairs, drinking, even evacuating, I decided to give this a chance and go see what was down this mental illness rabbit hole. I went back to the psychiatrist and I was suddenly reassured by the fact that only by looking at me, he was able to tell me what was going on in my head and why and how. He was treating my mental illness for what it was, a malfunctioning of the organ brain. There was a lot of science involved, and while I was expecting voodoo dolls and mana potions, he was actually giving me scientific explanations. So I started therapy, and at the very first stage of my disorder, I used to go to the doctor once a week. And that went on for a while. But when he realized how resistant I was being to traditional therapeutic approaches, he decided to change strategy. And he prescribed me writing therapy. Writing therapy. It sounded a lot fancier than it was. What he really told me to do was to keep a journal. I had never kept a journal before. I had never kept a journal because to me, writing was so much more than that. Writing was for sure more than some simple,
"My dear diary, today I saw him at school. I think he even smiled at me. I love his beautiful golden locks that shine like 1,000 suns. Will he ever invite me to prom? I hope he does. I really, really, really want to kiss him."
No, I had never done that, and I was sure I was not going to start then. But then I did. I did, because when you are desperate and everything else fails, you want to cling to whatever it is in your power or whatever you think to be in your power to try and help yourself. Survival instincts do this to human beings. I was a human being and I needed to ensure my survival. So I started keeping a journal in which I write down as often as I need all that I'm going through when it comes to anxiety and panic. It could be symptoms, it could be the feelings that I am experiencing in a definite moment, it could be reminders or suggestions for my next episode. Whatever has to do with my mental disorder, I write it down. My mental illness journal looks like this. This is actually it. Well, at least one of those. Considering that I started doing this when I was 18 and now I'm 34, and yes, I know that I don't look one day older than 21, but I'm actually 34, but thank you. So considering that I started this when I was 18, I have a number of these little things now, and they all look the same. It's impossible to tell them apart unless you open one and read what's inside, and even then it might be still very difficult to tell them apart because panic disorder can be extremely repetitive. Anyway, this little black thing here is the very reason why I decided to start this video project. After so many years and after trying every trick in the book, I realized that the one thing that I have never done with my mental disorder is share it. And since I'm not willing to publish my journals because, let's face it, nobody will buy them or read them, I decided to put a face on it and send my daily struggles and my story out there. Year after year, brick after brick, avoidance mechanism after avoidance mechanism, I have been building the narrow walls of the box I live in for almost 20 years now. And even if there might be no room left in it but for myself, I thought that maybe some of you might find some solace in seeing that it actually looks just like your own. So, welcome to the box I live in.